It was supposed to be just another charming late-night segment, another blend of wit, royalty, and light banter that audiences would eat up with the same affection they'd shown Prince Harry in every public appearance since his royal exit. But the night things unraveled on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, no one, not the producers, not the audience, not even Harry himself, could have predicted the temperature in the room would turn from polite curiosity to chilling confrontation in under 15 minutes. From the moment Prince Harry stepped onto the stage, something was off, not in his posture or his speech, but in the quiet intensity behind his eyes, the way he studied the audience, the camera, and Colbert himself, as if bracing for something he already suspected would happen. And Colbert, always quick to sense a shift in tone, leaned into it, joking lightly at first about Harry's memoir, the tabloids, the British press, but something about the glint in Harry's expression suggested he'd come less to charm and more to challenge, and as Colbert asked a seemingly innocent question about privacy and publicity, the tension snapped. Harry, pausing for a moment, said quietly but clearly, "You're doing it too, Stephen. You're part of the same machine. You package pain and trauma into primetime content." And the crowd laughed nervously, unsure whether this was part of a pre-written bit or an unexpected pivot into genuine discomfort. But it wasn't a joke, not to Harry, who continued without a hint of a smile, describing how American media had pretended to offer him refuge while still exploiting every quote, every gesture, even the silences, to sell headlines. Colbert, taken aback but still composed, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground, asking about Harry's Netflix deal, to which Harry responded sharply, "You think because I'm trying to control the story that I'm a hypocrite? You sit here every night pretending to be above it all, but you're just another gatekeeper guarding the palace of distraction," and that, right there, cracked the atmosphere in the room open. Colbert, who had always prided himself on balancing humor with conscience, felt cornered in his own studio. What followed was not a shouting match but something far more unsettling, a philosophical standoff, where civility wore a mask of fury and every word was barbed with meaning. Harry brought up colonialism, media complicity, the legacy of monarchy, and the moral contortions required of a man who had lived inside both privilege and pain. He spoke of Afghanistan, not as a soldier seeking praise but as a man who saw how warfare was gamified for national pride and how media in both the UK and the US twisted bloodshed into branding. Colbert tried, valiantly at first, to respond with nuance, suggesting that satire had a role in awakening audiences, that comedy could be a mirror, not a mask, but Harry wasn't having it. "Satire is safe when it punches up, Stephen," he said, "but too often, you punch sideways and call it courage." The room fell silent again. For the first time in years, Colbert looked truly rattled, not just because a guest had challenged him, but because the challenge felt uncomfortably accurate. The audience, unsure whether to clap or cringe, remained eerily still. A producer offstage gave the signal to cut to commercial, but the cameras kept rolling a moment longer, catching the exact second when Colbert said, under his breath but still audible, "We're not doing this," and Harry responded with a resigned nod, stood up, unpinned his mic, and walked off the set, not storming, not protesting, just leaving. What followed in the minutes, hours, and days afterward would become a masterclass in media spin. The official clip released by the show was heavily edited, framing the segment as tense but respectful, a disagreement between friends. But bootleg footage recorded by an audience member and leaked within hours told a different story, unedited, unsweetened, and utterly raw. Social media exploded. On Twitter, hashtags like #Harry vs Colbert and #Truth on Late Night trended globally. Commentators on both sides of the Atlantic weighed in. Some accused Harry of hypocrisy, saying he wanted the spotlight without the scrutiny. Others called Colbert a coward for backing out of a real conversation. Memes flooded the internet, Harry depicted as a rebel prince, Colbert as a nervous court jester. But beneath the chaos, a deeper question took root: what is the role of truth in entertainment? And who gets to speak it? The moment was bigger than two men in suits on a stage. It exposed a fracture in the carefully curated alliance between media and celebrity, a fragile contract that says, "We laugh with you if you don't make us think too hard." And Harry, for better or worse, had broken that contract in front of millions. Backstage, it was chaos. Publicists clashed with producers. Colbert, reportedly shaken, took an unscheduled break from filming the rest of the week. An internal memo from CBS urged staff not to speculate publicly on the events. Harry, meanwhile, vanished from the public eye. No statements, no social media, no follow-up appearances. His team declined interviews, saying only, "The prince said what he came to say." That silence, ironically, spoke louder than any press conference. He didn't need to double down. He had dropped a truth bomb on primetime television and left the fragments for others to sort through. Meanwhile, think pieces proliferated. Some hailed him as a necessary disruptor, comparing his departure from the royal family to a deeper exodus, from systems, from narratives, from control. Others criticized him as naive, a man who thought he could dismantle the media by appearing on it. But even critics admitted that the encounter had done something rare. It had stripped away the veneer of performance and revealed the cost of honesty in a world addicted to spectacle. The entertainment industry, reeling from the fallout, began to reassess its approach to celebrity interviews. Late-night shows quietly updated guest protocols, adding new clauses about content boundaries and pre-approved thematic outlines. Producers at rival shows whispered warnings, "Don't book Harry unless you want trouble." And yet, viewership across all major talk shows spiked the following week, not because people wanted to be comforted, but because, in some strange way, they wanted more of what had happened that night. Rawness, realness, the thrill of truth spoken without choreography. A cultural hunger, long denied, had suddenly been acknowledged. Even if people didn't agree with Harry, they respected that he didn't flinch. Colbert's silence in the aftermath became its own kind of confession. When he returned to the show, he avoided the topic for 3 full episodes, focusing instead on political satire, celebrity cameos, and the usual array of safe humor. But viewers noticed the shift. He was cautious now, measured. The sparkle of invincibility, once his greatest strength, now flickered with doubt. And then, quietly, a podcast episode appeared. Not from Colbert, not from Harry, but from a third-party journalist who had been in the studio audience that night and had spoken with multiple crew members. The episode, titled, "The Night the Mask Slipped," went viral in under 24 hours. It offered a detailed, moment-by-moment account of the clash, including off-air moments, staff reactions, and an alleged conversation between Harry and a young intern who reportedly asked, "Do you regret saying it?" To which Harry replied, "Only that it took me this long." That line lit another fire online. People began quoting it not just in discussions about media, but in conversations about truth, identity, conformity. Somehow, a talk show interview had become a cultural turning point. Universities hosted panels about the Colbert-Harry disruption. Satirists questioned their own motives. And among younger audiences, a new phrase began circulating, "Don't Colbert it," a warning against dodging discomfort for the sake of applause. Months passed. Colbert, never one to avoid introspection, eventually addressed the moment in a lengthy segment titled, "When the Mirror Talks Back." In it, he acknowledged that while satire is meant to provoke, it's often protected by the illusion of detachment. "We say we're jesters," he said, "but we forget that jesters once risked their lives telling kings the truth. These days, we just tell sponsors what they want to hear." The monologue was widely praised, even by those who had criticized him. And while he never directly apologized, the tone said enough. Harry, for his part, resumed public appearances months later, not on talk shows, but in forums, town halls, and panel discussions about trauma, narrative, and media accountability. He'd shifted lanes entirely, rejecting the usual PR circuit in favor of unscripted, often uncomfortable conversations. And while some still rolled their eyes, saying he was trading one kind of spotlight for another, others saw a man refusing to let his past, or his fame, define his message. In time, the dust settled, but the echoes of that night remained. Talk shows became a little less predictable. Guests became a little more guarded. Audiences became a little more alert to the choreography behind their entertainment. And in certain corners of the internet, fans still debated whether Harry had crossed a line or drawn one that needed to be drawn. But what no one disputed was this. For one unscripted, unforgettable moment, the walls between persona and person, between entertainment and interrogation, crumbled, and in their place, something startlingly human appeared. Not a prince, not a comedian, just 2 men facing the uncomfortable truth that even in a world built on applause, silence has a cost. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can do on television is tell the truth without flinching. Weeks after that unforgettable night, the cultural shockwaves hadn't fully faded, and in places far from the Colbert studio in New York, the confrontation between Prince Harry and Stephen Colbert was still being dissected like scripture. University campuses in the UK and US were holding open forums, media classes were showing the leaked clip as case studies in ethics, and opinion writers across the political spectrum continued their endless tug of war. Was Harry a brave truth-teller or an entitled defector? Meanwhile, tabloid media, the very machine Harry had condemned, ironically couldn't stop covering him. They ran headlines that alternated between faux sympathy and veiled ridicule, casting him in ever-shifting archetypes: the wounded soldier, the bitter exile, the media hypocrite, the radical royal. But Harry wasn't responding. His silence wasn't avoidance, it was strategic, powerful, and in its own way, revolutionary. He knew that anything he said would only be diluted by the media lens, so he chose, instead, to let the moment speak for itself. Behind the scenes, a quiet transformation was underway. Harry began building something, not another documentary or book, but a platform for other voices, a space where whistleblowers, veterans, journalists, trauma survivors, and media professionals could share stories too inconvenient for primetime television. Funded anonymously at first, the initiative titled Unfiltered started gathering momentum, pitched not as a product but a resistance to productization itself. Colbert, back in his studio, felt the long shadow of that moment every time he walked past the guest chair. Something in him had changed, not his wit or professionalism, but his sense of control. He began referencing the incident in subtle ways, a pause here, a glance there, occasional lines like, "We're not afraid of real talk, unless we are." The writers noticed, the staff noticed, even the audience noticed. Ratings remained strong, but something intangible had shifted. Where once people tuned in for catharsis, now they watched warily, wondering which segment might stumble into realness. Sponsors began asking for tone consistency, and executives pressured the show to lean harder into safe humor again. Colbert felt the bind. He was still the face of a multi-million-dollar machine, but the mask had slipped, and now he had to wear it knowingly. Privately, he reached out to Harry, not to apologize, not to debate, but to connect, as men caught in the same paradox, speaking truth inside a system that commodifies every word. The message, reportedly brief, said only, "Still thinking about that night. I hope you're doing what you believe in." Harry never replied directly, but a week later, Colbert received a nondescript envelope in the mail. Inside was a card with no signature, no message, just a single printed line: "The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't forgive either." Unfiltered went live 6 months after the Late Show clash. Quietly, without PR buzz or celebrity endorsement, it launched its first episode featuring a former British intelligence officer who'd been silenced for exposing surveillance abuses. The raw, uncut conversation, hosted not by Harry himself, but a rotating panel of independent moderators, went viral overnight. What made Unfiltered different wasn't the content, but the absence of gloss. No background music, no edits, no laugh tracks, just human beings sitting across from each other, daring to speak unapproved truths. Soon, whistleblowers from tech, finance, law enforcement, and media came forward, and slowly, a community formed around the project. It wasn't loud, it wasn't trendy, but it was undeniable. And though Harry rarely appeared on camera, his fingerprints were all over the ethos. One day, a former Colbert Show researcher anonymously submitted an essay to Unfiltered titled, "When Truth Became Too Loud," an introspective piece about the internal contradictions of satire. It was shared millions of times. Colbert read it. Alone in his office, he whispered, "They're listening." Meanwhile, other late-night hosts began altering their approach, not out of sincerity, but survival. One segment on a rival show spoofed Harry's Unfiltered model, mocking its seriousness with fake trauma stories and sound effects. The parody backfired, leading to online outrage and a wave of unsubscribes. Audiences were evolving. Irony, once king, now bowed to authenticity. And in this cultural recalibration, Harry's once dismissed defiance became a North Star for a generation tired of performance politics and intellectual cowardice. Not everyone was ready to follow, of course. Powerful media execs called him dangerous. Royal insiders branded him unstable. But even they had to admit, People were listening to him differently now. Not as a tabloid character. Not as Meghan's husband. But as a man who had walked away from two empires, monarchy and media, to carve a new kind of platform. One night, nearly a year to the day after their explosive interview, Stephen Colbert opened his show without music. He sat alone at the desk, no band, no jokes, just silence. He spoke directly to the camera. We don't always know the cost of what we avoid, but sometimes the audience does. And sometimes, they remember what we hoped they'd forget. The episode was titled, What I Didn't Say. He spent 12 minutes reflecting not just on that night, but on how his show, like so many others, had become polished to the point of paralysis. It was the most serious segment he'd ever done, and the most viewed. Harry never commented on the episode. He didn't need to. The world had already moved forward, past curated charm and into the messy terrain of truth. And though the prince and the comedian never met again, their clash remained a point of inflection, the moment entertainment cracked open and something far more urgent slipped through.